It is Tuesday, so it's time for another live edition of the Desmond Johnson Show here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com. David Glenn from the North Carolina Sports Network joining me bi-weekly as he does, sharing that share on Tuesdays with Jalen Gilkey from WFUY News 2. It's the Sports Buffet with David Glenn. We're going to get into it. It was a very, very, very busy weekend, and it kicked off the beginning of Super Bowl week, which is the beginning of right now, so we'll get into all that. We got your Luka AD stuff. We got UNC Duke fallout. Bowman Gray cookout clash thoughts on that and a whole lot more. Brendan Marks from The Athletic will be in at 12:45 and get a little bit deeper into ACC and college hoops, plus his thoughts on the Luka AD trade as well. Let's just go ahead and roll that intro. It's the Desmond Johnson Show.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Yeah, welcome to the Carolinas. Everywhere you go, the sky is Carolina blue, the finest. Live action, feedback, the city needs that. I've been number one, no cap. Here's the recap. Adrenaline is my addiction. I'm about to relapse. Step on the turf if you won't and get your weed whack. I'm going harder than a martyr on the starter end. It's the heart of man, that's a rap like a cardigan. I'm breaking records, it's 4th and inches. I count the seconds. The over-under's my roar of thunder, my secret weapon. Yeah, the game is to be told. I don't break, I break modes. Follow me on Tobacco Road.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
And welcome into a live edition of the Desmond Johnson Show here on your home for Triad Sports coverage, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com. We got a very, very busy Tuesday and a very, very busy week in general. Matt Alkees will come in tomorrow, beat writer for Sports Illustrated for the Charlotte Hornets, and he'll talk a little bit more in depth about what not just the Anthony Davis, Luka Doncic trade, but there was a couple of trades, and the trade deadline's still coming up. We'll ask him if the Hornets are going to be buyers or sellers coming up here. And just around the league, we'll go tomorrow, all NBA. But I wanted to do Sports Buffet with DG today because there was a couple of hot button topics I wanted to hit on from the past weekend. Starting off the biggest news, Dallas Mavericks all-star Luka Doncic traded to the Los Angeles Lakers for Anthony Davis. I'm a Laker fan, DG, so when I woke up Sunday morning and started looking through my phone, and I saw the tweet from Shams over at ESPN. I was like, somebody hacked his account or something. That can't be right. And then he came back with, no, this is 1,000% correct. So your initial thoughts when you saw that, and I asked you off camera, can you think of a situation where two top 10 players in any sport were traded mid-season, and it almost feels like both sides kind of got what they wanted out of this? It's out of the blue. It's put all NBA players on alert that no one is untouchable, basically. Luka, I think, finished second or third in MVP voting last year. He's 25. Right. Your thoughts when you saw this happen in the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, we're no longer surprised when even one of the best players in a sport gets traded, right? Like before you and I were born, Wilt Chamberlain was traded multiple times in the NBA. Even though he was the leading scorer in the NBA 5 years in a row, he was traded. Now, this whole super heavyweight traded for super heavyweight, and whereas you and I are used to chaos in the offseason, right? It's hard to surprise us with an offseason trade. It's much more rare to see two of the 10 best players in the NBA traded for each other at midseason. So I'm not sure I can come up with an NBA example that would exceed this, because Luka has been first team All NBA for each of the last 5 years, and AD has been first or second team All NBA for most of the last decade plus. I mean, it just doesn't get any bigger than that. And one of the two is in his prime. AD being in his early 30s by this point. So it's hard to find a comparison. It makes it fun. And I don't think we're going to know for a little while, who won this mass gambit between Dallas and LA.
It feels like when it happened, my first thought was, well, this must be LeBron's last year, because it feels like the Lakers are trying to build for life without LeBron by doing this, by trading off AD. And you mentioned AD is 31, which feels like he's been in the league for like 20 years, but because he came in so young from out of Kentucky. But on the other end with Dallas, you've now created a front line with Anthony Davis, Daniel Gafford, and Derek Lively, where you've got literally 3 7-footers on your front line, pretty much, with Kyrie Irving just basically throwing lobs up to everybody. They're trying to win right now, and people forget the Mavericks were in the finals last year. So the West is kind of jumbled, but they're doing this for now. The Lakers, it seems like they're doing this for the next 10 years. Like, my second thought was, well, what did he do in terms of Luka Doncic? Because you don't just trade off the third best player in the league for Anthony Davis and a couple of spare parts. Like, they didn't even ask any other teams. Like, the Lakers were the only team they even talked to. So it made me wonder, was there something going on behind the scenes in terms of Luka and management or whatever? It doesn't seem like it from Luka's end, but his conditioning has been a topic of conversation that I've seen, where I've seen reports he had blown up to 260, 270 pounds. He didn't look 270 coming off the plane last night in LA. Yeah, very slim. So
one thing we know in this era of contracts that in some cases get as large as, $100 million. That's where we are with some of these long-term contracts in some of the bigger sports. You're going to know everything about that guy, not only from the scouting department, from the analytics department. You are going to have private investigator level information about these guys and what they do off the court and what are their nutrition habits. And does somebody have a drinking issue? Is somebody doing the wrong things on the road? You're going to pull. We don't know the answers to those questions, but we've seen weight issues raised, lifestyle issues raised around Luka. And maybe that's why Dallas, or one of the reasons why Dallas felt good about this trade. We might not know all the answers for a long time, but I think it's a fair question to ask, because these things don't happen haphazardly. And giving up one of the 5 or so best players in the NBA in his prime is unusual. And yes, they got a great player in return, but there's got to be more to it than that.
Luka was up for a supermax extension with Dallas. Had he stayed, it would have been a 6-year, $325 million extension. So a little over $65 million per year. Actually, yeah, about $65 million per year. And it, by all indications, sound like Dallas did not want to pay that, or they did not believe that Luka was worth that. Since he got traded, he's no longer eligible for the supermax. So the Lakers aren't going to pay him $325 million, but they're going to pay him somewhere close to it with a max when he comes up here for his extension. And again, Luka's 25. I'd imagine at this point, the Lakers are going to go try to find a big man. They're going to let LeBron go out in style. But again, my initial thought was this must be LeBron's last year. Like, either they think LeBron's going to retire at the end of this year, or he's given them some sort of indication that he's going to retire this year. But I feel like he's going to end it as a Laker, end of this year. Whatever they end up doing in the playoffs, it is what it is. But his career has been basically written at this point. There's not a whole lot more he can add to it in year 21. The thing I was trying to avoid was what happened Saturday night, which was UNC basically just getting the brakes beaten off of them by Duke in Cameron Indoor Stadium, 87-70. The final score, Carolina did play better in the second half, but DG, I got to admit, I'm a lifelong Carolina fan. That was the first Carolina-Duke game where by the time I got to halftime, I had switched the game over to my iPad mini and I had flipped my TV over to the Royal Rumble because it was literally, it was so frustrating to watch. It was like watching the little kids challenge the high school kids on the playground, like to play basketball. Like Duke, Jay Billis made an excellent point during the game. Duke's defense, they're not guarding players, they're guarding the pass. And like, they're so long. Even just the basic bounce passes and chest passes that Carolina was trying to just do to run an offense, Duke is putting their hands on it. Like, just Malik Brown in particular, him getting back for that game was huge. Just even them trying to get up the court, just trying to throw the ball at the court. There's a Duke player touching the ball, like just knocking it out the way and just disjoining everything. And Carolina never really got comfortable in the first half. And honestly, in the second half, because they were down by as much as, I think, 32 at one point, I think Duke just let off the gas. Just naturally, it's still a young team. They just kind of naturally let off the gas, and Carolina kind of figured some stuff out, but not enough to make me think they were going to get back in the game. I think the closest they got was 15. A lot of people, including Brendan Marks, who will be on a little bit later, predicted a blowout in this matchup. Your thoughts coming out of the first UNC Duke game? Are you worried about Carolina starting off with that question?
Well, in terms of losing to the Blue Devils in Cameron, I don't think that by itself is a red flag, right? You can realize that this is an elite Duke team. There hasn't been a team undefeated in the ACC since 1999. And this Duke team has a chance to go 20-0, which, of course, this is a longer schedule. So it's harder to go 20-0 than it was 16-0 or something smaller back in the day. So the caliber of the opponent meant a lot. And I thought the matchup was really bad for the Tar Heels, because what's the first thing you have to do when you think about this Duke team? You have to think, who's going to guard Cooper Flagg? I mean, there's a short list of players in the history of college basketball who lead their team in not only points and rebounds, but also assists, steals, and blocks. Cooper Flagg is the rare unicorn almost that leads his team in all 5 of those categories. You don't often have a dude who leads in rebounding and assists and points, right? Much less blocks and steals. And this is a small Carolina team. So you have to ask a great defender, but a guy who's only 6'3" and Seth Trimble to try to be one of those trying to deal with Cooper Flagg. And that's just not going to work, even though I think Trimble's an elite defender when you ask him to do things a little bit, more within his capabilities. The other part that's not unique to facing Duke is that Carolina's backcourt pieces have not fit together all season. It's a reminder of the year where Carolina missed the tournament after being the preseason number 1. The backcourt chemistry that year between RJ Davis and Caleb Love, both individually talented guys. Together, the chemistry just didn't work. And right now, if you watch the Tar Heels play, the Ian Jackson plus Elliot Cadeau plus Seth Trimble plus RJ Davis, it's not greater than the sum of the parts, which is the purpose of team sports, right? You're supposed to collectively be better than the individual sum of your parts. That's part of a coach's job, is to make that happen. This Duke team is better than its collection of wonderfully talented parts. This Carolina team is not better than its collection of parts. And that's hard to explain. And it's up to Hubert Davis to figure out a way to find answers down the stretch and avoid becoming that Carolina coach who misses the tournament for the second time in 4 years. Because at that school, Steve Forbes can be at Wake for 5 years and get the benefit of the doubt. He hasn't even been to the tournament yet. At Carolina, you can't miss the tournament half the time and not expect to be under the microscope to an extreme degree. And that's where Hubert Davis is right now.
And because of that up, down, it's not really allowed Hubert to have that cushion with the fan base that you would think for someone who made it to the national championship in his first season as head coach, really not even with his own players. And he never really had that cushion yet at Carolina because they've been up and down when it comes to either they're really, really good or they're like 500, like literally.
Regular season title last year.
Yeah, the number 1 seed. It's crazy to think how far they've come since then, where it's almost like Hubert is scared to play big men. Like not scared to play him. He just feels like he doesn't have them. It feels like Ben Allen Lubin's been getting the majority of the minutes lately with Jalen Washington being injured. And we'll go a little bit more in depth with this with Brendan Marks here in just a couple of minutes. But again, that was the first time probably ever that I can think of watching Carolina basketball where I felt like we were just too small. Like everything we did, it felt like every third play I was screaming at the TV, we're too small. Like we're too small to try to do what we're too small. Like Duke is too big. They had one stretch out there. No one was shorter than 6'8" or something like that. And you've got Cam Alawatch in the middle at 7'2", just messing everything up. Like it was really hard to watch. And they'll see them again in about a month over at Smith Center. And again, for Carolina fans, they still have like 10 more games to play in ACC play. So the season's far from over. And it does lighten up after the stretch. I think they play Pitt on Saturday after a much needed week off. So we'll get with Brendan Marks here in just a bit on that. Real quick, another thing that I liked from this weekend that happened close by, our coverage of the Cookout Clash at Bowman Gray, NASCAR coming into Winston-Salem, historic Bowman Gray Stadium. They had a great Saturday. They did the primetime race at 8 o'clock on Sunday. Chase Elliott, if I'm not mistaken, is the one that won that race. I didn't want to go too much into the details of the race itself and everything else. I wanted to talk more about potential economic impact for Winston-Salem to do this again, because it looked, just from seeing the picture, shout out to Eric Messer, by the way, who does NASCAR photography for Bowman Gray now and is helping me out with some documentary stuff from here. And he was showing pictures of the track. You can see where NASCAR put a lot of money into, spit shining Bowman Gray up, and it looked really good. And it made me feel like that's not going to be a one-time off type thing. With NASCAR reinvigorating North Wilkesboro, and it looks like they're going to be back at Rockingham this year for the first time in a while. Do you think it's critical for NASCAR to start to institute these short track type things like Bowman Gray, like these preseason type things, and putting them there as an annual type thing? Or do you think it was going to be like a one-off type situation with NASCAR and Bowman Gray?
I think it's a philosophical question that NASCAR has been wrestling with for decades at this point. As a transplanted Northerner, even coming from Pennsylvania, I knew about Duke and Carolina. I knew about the great sports culture of the state of North Carolina. I didn't personally know as much about the NASCAR culture. But the bottom line is NASCAR was essentially born here a long time ago. NASCAR, if you look at the top 30 teams, it's something like 29 of them are located in the greater Charlotte area.
Yeah.
I mean, so we are truly then and now the home of NASCAR in every way. And the philosophical question has been, to what degree do you go to bigger cities, bigger tracks, brighter lights? And to what degree do you reward where the passion for NASCAR has been longest and deepest and most passionate? And that's in and around the Carolinas. And it's not just the Winston, Salem, Bowman Gray experience. It's North Wilkesboro, that right down the road from you, where a lot of people grew up watching races there every single year. And then it was vacant for a while. And then they're starting to bring that back as well. So it's a broader question. And I think they're getting back to their roots. They're trying to find that perfect blend of traveling around the country, going to bigger tracks, trying to create a bigger economic model, but not forgetting where they came from. It's a hard balance to strike, but I think examples like that one are proof that NASCAR is trying to strike that balance.
It's not very often you get, Fox, doing primetime live from Winston-Salem, and spotlighting it. And I thought everything went off really, really well. I think it was an economic boom for Winston-Salem for the weekend to have all these people come in here. And Bowman Gray, it's not like Bowman Gray doesn't need NASCAR. I think NASCAR needs Bowman Gray. Now, that Bowman Gray, they sell out every Saturday in the season during the summer as it is. And now that NASCAR's taking over the track and they're taking care of the rent and everything else, I would imagine that'll get more and more better. But you're always going to have the ones that yearn for the old school when the tickets were $5 and all that kind of stuff. But I thought it went off really, really well. Joining us right now from the Athletic, I was going to say UNC and Duke beat writer Brendan Marks, but from my understanding, they got you doing a little bit of everything now. Brendan Marks, sports writer for the Athletic, joining us here on the Desmond Johnson Show. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Yeah, no, I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me. Sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background.
I got a chihuahua somewhere in the house. So don't even worry about it.
No, I'm doing well. This season has certainly been, fascinating, and there's a lot of it here locally, but also a lot more broadly. So appreciate you guys having me.
Let's just get into it, Brendan. I'm a Carolina fan. What in the world on Saturday? Maybe I shouldn't even say what in the world, because I wasn't really surprised when it happened, but I was just telling DG, that's the first time. I just turned 47 2 Sundays ago. I've been a lifelong Carolina fan. Thank you. That was the first time in my life that I can think of a Carolina team not being able to do things like basic passes because of what Duke was doing on defense. And Jay Billis said it on the broadcast. Duke wasn't playing defense against the players. They were playing defense against the passing lanes. Like, they were literally just in the passing lanes all week or all night. And I do remember hearing you on some other show, you were like, it's going to be a blowout. Like, you were very definitive about it and went into it. Were you surprised by anything you saw on Saturday, or was it pretty much what you expected? Carolina losing 87-70 to Duke? Yeah,
not surprised in the least bit. Unfortunately, this is the reality of where these programs are at right now, where the teams are at. And, I heard a lot going into that game. The rivalry always delivers and crazier things have happened. And that much is true. I'm not saying that's not. But that was the 12th game in the history of the rivalry where a top 3 Duke team had played an unranked North Carolina team. Duke was 11-0 in those games with an average margin of victory in double digits. So in no way was I surprised at the result. And basically, if you were drawing up, in video game terms, a final boss for this UNC basketball team, it's Duke. It's Duke. It's a team that is gigantic. It's a team that defends. It's a team that doesn't let you play in transition and forces you to play in the half court, which North Carolina has struggled with at times this season. Like, it is the worst possible matchup you could draw for UNC. So no, I wasn't surprised. And, I think for a lot of people who have felt a certain way about UNC this season and the past 4 seasons, really, it was a pretty stark example of where both teams are respectively.
DJ.
Yeah, you want me to answer that or ask a question to
Oh
Brendan?
no, you got a question for Brendan.
Brendan, you've covered this league for a while now. It's hard to kind of answer some of the historical questions, but can you remember a year where in some weeks there was only one ACC team in the top 25? Or I'm old enough to remember when the ACC only got 3 teams into the NCAA tournament, but the size of the league was only 9.
Right, exactly.
3 out of 9 is not really embarrassing. There are also 6 out of 9 years. But here we are, it's not going to be 3 out of 18, but it's not going to be a pretty number most likely. Do you have a historical reference point for this kind of an ACC?
I mean, it's tough to think of one off the top of your head where it's, so clearly. I mean, I think you can make the argument that this is the worst year in ACC history. And, I love the ACC. I've grown up watching the ACC. I don't want to say that, but you look at the fact that in the past couple of seasons, the ACC always had an anchor. It was Louisville. It was a team at the bottom that was an albatross. And anytime you played that team, you were talking about, okay, there's nothing to gain if we win here. If we win by 5 points, our net ranking is going to go down because we didn't win by enough. And if we lose, our season's over. That happened to Clemson a couple of years ago. They lost to Louisville, and that was the end of their NCAA tournament hopes. The thing that is worse this year is instead of one anchor, there's like 8.
Yeah.
And if you go and you look, I looked at this a couple of weeks ago, and I'd have to go and see what the updated count is. But I checked how many Ken Palm sub 100 teams are there by high major league. The SEC had none. Shocker. The Big 12 had, I think, 1. The Big East had 1 or 2. The Big 10 had 2. And the ACC had 7. So you're talking about almost half. You're talking about almost half the league that represent, of the worst 8 ACC teams, they are 10 of the worst high major teams in all of college basketball. So the league just has so much, weighing it down at the bottom that if you're a Duke, for example, there are people at Duke who are worried that Duke is going to struggle in the NCAA tournament because they haven't been tested in the ACC.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than when Duke plays at Clemson on this Saturday, they do not have a league game other than the North Carolina game below a 90% win probability. Like, it is so stark. So no, I don't think there is a historical comparison because I think, just with the depth, the additions, expanding the conference, you've added a lot of bottom feeders. And I think, unfortunately, this is probably the worst year for the ACC in the modern era.
And I don't know if it's going to get any better anytime soon across the board because with the news coming in yesterday that Leonard Hamilton's going to be stepping down from Florida State after 25 years there. He was by far the most tenured coach in the league after the outflux award of different coaches that have retired over the past couple of years. But that seems like that's tied into it along with NIL and the portal and everything else. But just in the past, since 2020, we've lost, or not lost, but to retirement, we've lost Coach K, Roy Williams, Jimmy Boeheim, Tony Bennett, Jim Larinaga, now Leonard Hamilton. I'm sure I'm missing somebody.
Mike Bray, Notre Dame.
Mike Bray at Notre Dame. Yeah. That's a lot of coaching talent, years of experience gone all of a sudden. And now you're replacing them with, 4-year head coach Hubert Davis, 3-year head coach John Shire. There's going to be a stretch here. It almost feels like the 80s, like in the ACC, where it was still strong. It was still very top heavy because you had Dean Smith and that kind of thing. But it was always Carolina versus somebody. Over really the past 40 years, it's always been Carolina versus somebody. That's not the case like right now. And whenever Duke or Carolina has been weaker than they usually are, the league goes down anyway. It's always better when Duke and Carolina are top heavy and kind of carries the weight for the league. But if one of them is kind of slipping, it kind of ripples across the whole league. And you're kind of seeing that with the coaching thing now. My question for you, Brendan, NIL, going back to Carolina, it feels like a lot of their problems this year was that they got outbid for big men and had to go into the season without big men. I think they've rectified this with Caleb Wilson signing. And really with the Bill Belichick signing in football, I feel like it's going to open up the vault for NIL for football and men's basketball for Carolina. Do you feel like it's as simple as Carolina just needs to pay more money for players? And if that's the case, how sad is that for college basketball that it's at a point where Carolina just needs to pay more to get the same level of players they were getting 5 years ago without having to pay them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's just that, but certainly the money is a factor. I think last week before the Duke UNC game, John Shire was asked about the Blue Devils recruiting success and how they're able to continue keeping the coffers full. And he said, anybody who thinks that NIL is not part of the equation now would be foolish to say so. And so I think if you're North Carolina and you're used to kind of exactly what you're describing, Des, we're North Carolina. We get these guys. We have look at our, it was like, look at our banners, look at our jerseys. You get to play in the Dean Smith Center. That idea is dead. And for North Carolina fans, and especially people who work there, I think that's a really hard reality to wrap your head around. In this era of college athletics, guys do not dream about playing college basketball. They dream about making as much money as they can because largely their maximum earning potential for their entire lives is in college, and they care about making it to the pros. So if you can't do that, then you're not going to be getting the caliber of talent you're used to. And again, especially when you compare it to some of these other teams, this is going to be a shock. Do you know who the last NBA All-Star that North Carolina produced was?
Ooh, hold on. Let me think. All-Star? Oh, gosh. We probably got to go back into the 90s.
You sure do. It's Vince Carter.
Yep.
Oh, my God.
Vince Carter is the last NBA All-Star that North Carolina produced.
Wow.
Now, if you're a college kid growing up in North Carolina and you want to make it to the NBA, is that where you're going? You going to the place that hasn't produced an NBA All-Star in almost 30 years?
And even the kids that have made it to the NBA from Carolina over the past 20 years or so end up becoming role players in the NBA. Harrison Barnes, who was like their number one highest rated recruit ever, ended up basically being a rotation player in the NBA. And he's played 10 plus years, but yeah, you're right. A lot of those guys, for whatever reason, didn't translate. And it used to be the other way around. Like DG, I know you remember, back in Vince Carter, in the 90s or whatever, and even in the 80s, Carolina was the one that would have the top 10 NBA prospect, and Duke had the scrappy 3-star, 4-star kids that had to grow into whatever, and maybe got to the league and maybe made a rotation. It's flipped completely on its end. And I think now what we're seeing is it's caught up to Carolina, where
for decades we heard about how Duke won all these titles and had all these great college teams, but then Hurley flopped in the NBA, and Leitner wasn't as good as suspected in the NBA, and Jay Williams had his motorcycle wreck, and they were hanging their hat on Grant Hill as the closest example of turning college superstardom into NBA stardom. So yeah, we've seen this pendulum swing in this rivalry in virtually every conversation that you can come up with. If I have time for one more question for Brendan, mine would be, you've been around, 3 years ago, Carolina lost by 20 and was embarrassed by Duke. I think that was in the Smith Center in early February. And a lot of people were sticking a fork in the heels. And yet they obviously not only win those two big games against Duke down the stretch, surprisingly to many, they go to the national championship game. I remember Clemson 1 year ago, Brendan, had a losing record in conference play in early February. And people were asking, well, how good they could possibly be. They're under 500 in the ACC. Well, what happened? Brad Brownell takes them to the second Elite Eight in the history of the program, right? When you look at sort of the, can't even call it the midsection, sort of the upper middle class of the ACC. So let's put aside Duke as the elite team. Let's even put aside Louisville and Clemson, who have pretty solid resumes. When you look at the hopefuls, whether it's Carolina, Wake, Pitt, even SMU, Stanford, not sure if I'm forgetting somebody. Do you see a candidate in that second tier to just get better, stick together, win some big games, and make a run? And not even like the Miracle Wolfpack of a year ago. They're in their own category. I mean, teams that have shown enough that maybe it's in there somewhere.
For sure. And I think, it's the lesson that you pull from those teams you're mentioning, DG. It's the lesson you pull from North Carolina and the lesson you pull from Clemson. The pieces were always there. It was about underperformance in season. And so the team out of that group that you mentioned to me, the one that has the pieces, but maybe they haven't all fit or been firing on the same cylinders at the same time, is Wake Forest. Wake Forest has played top 25 defense all season long. We know that Steve Forbes, traditionally, at least his first 4 seasons at Wake Forest, has been much more of an offensive coach, has had some absolutely elite offenses, but the defensive end was never there. The script is flipped this time, and especially in early December, Wake Forest had a number of kind of lackluster offensive performances in the non-conference that hurt their computer ratings and their metrics. Since then, they've just kept getting better, and we'll see what ends up happening with Omaha Blue. But again, if you can get a guy like that back, I think that gives them even more depth in the front court behind Efton Reed and Trayvon Spillers. Cam Hildreth has looked great of late. Hunter Salas has been much better since Tyler Johnson became their point guard. Like, I think there, if you're looking at a team like that could make a run, it's a Wake Forest team that has all these pieces, that has shown it can be an elite offense with these pieces before, that has been much more of a defensive team so far this year. So I think that Wake Forest is a tournament team this year. I think they deserve to be in. The others, Pitt really hurt itself by losing to Virginia. I mean, that's a might be a fatal loss. North Carolina, I know we say there's 10 games less on the schedule. There's 3 that matter. They've got Pitt, they've got Clemson, they've got Duke. I don't think they're beating Duke.
Change my mind. Yeah.
if you can beat Clemson and Pitt, you're back in the conversation. But they don't have the pieces there. Stanford and SMU, I don't think they really have the resume to probably even get that opportunity. So Wake is the one to me that I look at like as a team that if it got in, you've got an elite guard in Hunter Salas who can take over at times. You have legitimate big men in Spillers and Reed. I think Wake is a team in the ACC that if they were to get in would have the potential to, maybe even make the second weekend.
So it looks like Duke, and then you've got Louisville, Clemson, Wake, and then there's a tier below that that's like Carolina, Pitt, a couple others.
Remember, the bracketologists are not super high on Wake. Right. I actually agree with Brendan in terms of forecasting the future. I like the Deeks as well, but their existing resume is not really viewed any more favorably than those other. Again, after Duke, Louisville, and Clemson, it's stuck in the muck. Really, that next
it
year.
is. Their analytics are not good. They haven't been good most of this season. They really hurt themselves in December. But again, there are no bad losses on the team sheet versus, Pitt we talked about with Virginia. North Carolina losing to Stanford at home is not great. And again, they do still have that win against Michigan. They need Michigan to keep going. That loss at Xavier, they need Xavier to keep playing well. Versus North Carolina, you've got the UCLA win, and that's, essentially it on that team sheet. So.
Follow Brendan on X at Brendan R. Marks, the Athletics. Brendan Marks here with us here. Real quick before we get you out of here, Brendan, outside of college basketball, because again, the Athletics kind of got you right in a little bit of everything right now. What were your thoughts when you woke up Sunday morning and saw that Luka Doncic had been traded to the Los Angeles Lakers for Anthony Davis and a couple of spare parts?
I'll tell you what. I'll give you a little behind the curtain. I did not wake up to that news. I was still awake writing when that news broke. And so I was sitting in the Duke media room. I'm sitting next to Connor O'Neill. And I'm midway through my story, and he taps me on the shoulder, and what do you want? And he said, "I think Shams got hacked." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You got to look at this." And I looked at it, and I was like, "Yeah, 100%, he definitely got hacked." And the fact that you have to start your next tweet with "Yes, this is real,"
this is 1,000% real.
Connor made a great point in the moment. The last time that it felt like it was like almost an internet joke when news of that magnitude came out was when Roy retired on April 1st.
Yeah, April 1st. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's bewildering. I still don't think we have the full story on that one. But man, that was suddenly it made a Duke UNC blowout seem even less consequential than it already was.
Who do you think won? Who do you think won that trade just initially? The Lakers or the Mavericks?
Long-term, the Lakers for sure. You've got the next guy. You've got, he's going to take the baton. Like they couldn't find an immediate guy after Kobe until they signed LeBron. Couldn't find an immediate guy after LeBron. Guess what? You just did. So, I think he's a top 5 player in the league. He's leading scorer. You saw what he did in the finals. Like, how could you ask for more than that?
And again, I was talking to DG at the beginning of the show. I can't think of any trade in all of the 4 major sports where 2 top 10 in their prime players got traded mid-season. Sometimes you'll get something like that where like AD got to the Lakers because they gave up a boatload of draft picks and everything else. I don't think the Lakers gave up any draft picks in this trade. If they did, it wasn't a whole lot. So they
gave up one. The fact that they didn't even have to give up their second first is insane too. So
meanwhile, Rudy Gobert, he got 5 first when they traded him to Minnesota. It's like, what is going on? So if anything, the conspiracy theorists out there, they're like, oh, the NBA ratings were low this year. They need to do something to spark it up and get it ready. Hey, how about we do this massive once in a lifetime trade during Super Bowl week and just swap Luka and AD and get everybody talking about the NBA. So I got that there. Matt Alquiz will be with me tomorrow from Sports Illustrated, beat writer for the Charlotte Hornets. We'll go a little bit more in depth with that because we didn't even get into some of the other trade. De'Aaron Fox getting traded to the Spurs, pairing him with Wemby. That's something to look at over the next 5-6 years as well. Because De'Aaron Fox, I think he's one of the only players in the league that's averaged 25 and 5 for like 5 straight years or something like that. So he's been playing well. We'll get into all of that and a little bit more. Before I let you go, though, Brendan, getting you out here on this one, is Duke going 20-0?
If they win at Clemson, yes.
Never thought that would ever, ever
and
happen.
If they do, the last ACC team to go undefeated in conference play, Duke in '99. That team turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah, they lost to UConn in the finals.
They won the ACC tournament, but fell short in the NCAA title game.
That's probably the best team to never win a title.
I was going to say, DG, that's something. Keep that rolling in your head, DG, because somewhere along the way, maybe we bring Brendan back for that in a couple of weeks when the tournament starts getting going. Best teams to have never won a title from the ACC.
Elton Brand, Maggette, Trajan Langdon, Battier. I mean, jeez, they were loaded. They
only lost like 1 or 2 games that whole year.
Twice the whole year. Yeah. One of the 2 being in that UConn game.
So there's a couple. My mind went immediately to 2012 Carolina. Like there's a couple that should have won. 98 Carolina. There's a couple of Duke. 95 Duke probably should have won it. So not
2024 NC State does.
No. I'm still scratching my head on what in the world happened last year where this is whirlwind in Raleigh, and then now you look at it and it's like all you did was buy Kevin Keats like an extra 3 years of employment, like because it's going to be the same thing for the next like 3 years, and State fans don't know what to do with their hands because they're like, oh, we had last year, but now it's like, oh, we're NC State again.
I actually think I said this the other day. For the first time in my life, I feel like NC States are being relatively rational about that whole thing.
They kind of are, yeah.
I feel like they understood, like, hey, this was a comment. We can appreciate it without understanding that this is the new expectation. So.
That's follow them on Twitter or X or whatever the young kids are calling it these days at Brendan R. Marks. Brendan from the Athletic. Appreciate coming through, and we will have you back on here before the season is over in the ACC when Duke's at 19-0 or whatever. Probably before Duke Carolina week. For David Glenn, this is Desmond Johnson. You've been watching and listening to the Desmond Johnson Show. We've got a load of high school basketball later on tonight on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. Just follow us on X or on Facebook to get the listings for all that. But I think we got 3 games tonight starting at 6 o'clock. So we will see you then.